Welcome everyone, my name is Meza and this is a new build guide series on the game called Satisfactory, which I'm absolutely in love with. But before we get into the series, there's a few tidbits that we need to get out of the way. So here's this episode, which is 10+1 building tips for Satisfactory. Now we're not going to cover advanced and creative build style kind of building tips. We're just going to cover the basics that help you to avoid headaches later down the line. So let's get into it. I remember when I started the game, I was like, I'm going to build with nature, I'm going to use the ground and no one can deter me from it. Sooner or later, I ended up doing things like this. I couldn't align buildings, the elevation was off, I couldn't measure distance. It quickly turned into a massive headache and everyone was shouting at me, like, use foundations. Yes, that's my first tip, use foundations. For one, they give you a nice flat surface to build on. Two, they provide you with some snap points that you can use to align your machines, building materials, conveyor belts, you name it. They help you measure distance because every single foundation has a set size. They're always 8x8 on the surface and their height is 1, 2 and 4 meters. You can see this in the build menu as well. And last but not least, they are the designated driving surface for the factory cart. Tip number 2, build on a global grid. This might seem a bit off at first, but trust me, once your factory outgrows every single size you've ever anticipated and your outposts merge into one giant mega factory, you'll thank me. You want all your bits and pieces to actually fit together when they merge. How you make a giant grid? Well, you just start building out with foundations and then you build down where you need to build a new platform, and there you have it. Your new platform is on a global grid. Have you ever done something like this before? Yeah, me too. Aligning those miners on the nodes to your foundation grid is a bit difficult. Or is it? Tip number 3, put foundations under the miners. Yes, you can. You can put foundations under the miners as long as they're not more than 2 meters above the node that the miner is going to use. Coming from Factorio. Or you just simply love load balancers. A lot of us do, because they make sense in our heads. However, in Satisfactory, they're nothing more than pretty most of the times. Tip number 4, don't use load balancers unless you really want to. Use manifolds instead. They'll be a bit slower at start, but they will get the job done just as well as load balancers. Tip number 5, don't overclock any machine apart from extractors and miners. The simple reason is, it's not worth it. While the yield curve of overclocking is linear, going from 100, 200, 250%, the power usage of those buildings increases in a different curve. You can see more on this image, but if you want to actually see all the numbers, go to the Satisfactory Wikipedia, you'll find all the information there. What you can do instead is to build 250% more machines. It would make your factory look much cooler. If you really want to overclock, at least do it properly. Tip number 6, tame lizard doggos. Why? Because you can go out and hunt for slugs. It's a bit dangerous and you have to explore and there's a limited amount of slugs on the map. Or you can have an infinite resource of them. Lizard doggos can give you all sorts of materials that you can make medicinal inhalers out of, or they can give you every kind of slug. Purple slugs, yellow slugs, green slugs, and they give you a lot. One streamer called Kazanator reported more than 600 power shards over 5 days from only 27 doggos. Tip number 7, build your conveyors, pipes, hypertubes at least 4 meters above ground inside buildings and at least 8 meters above ground outside of buildings. Why? Because as your factory grows, you'll have carts, tractors, trucks, and trains speeding through your factory. Give them and yourself some space to move around. A traversable factory is not only going to look good, but it's going to help you get from A to B. Tip number 8, when you're designing your transportation system, make sure that your roads are at least 5 foundations wide. This would ensure your trucks, trains, tractors do not collide when they're going in opposite directions. Tip number 9, use verticality. build upwards, build down. There's so much space. Say you've just tiered up. You have double the amount of ores because you have a new conveyor belt, you have a new miner, and you need to figure out suddenly where to put all that processing power. Well, why not put it on top of the previous one? Double the ores, double the processing units in the same space. You can go high as you want. Also, you can put your transport systems, your belts and everything under the base, which cleans up all of the clutter. Tip number 10. Build your main base on stilts above the tallest landmark in your chosen location. It might seem compelling at first to build with nature, but it rarely works out in the long run. You can always have nature reserves in the areas you build, but as a general rule, pick the highest point in your area and start your factory platform above it. This will give you a flat surface to build on top of and enough space on the ground to get around with belts, vehicles and other builds. Use pillars or stilts or whatever you come up with to make the platform look a bit more natural instead of one giant floating structure. And finally, the +1 bonus tip is to always have a design principle in mind, whether it's production lines or micro factories or modular builds, outpost builds, or even just small little rules of thumb that helps you figure out where to put your power, where to put your belts, how to build them. Just be consistent with it and it will make your life much simpler. Thank you everyone for watching this. I hope you'll come back for the entire build series. We will be covering all my modular builds. If you want to see the full playthrough, come over to twitch.tv/vsbmeza3. But here on the YouTube channel, we'll be focusing on quick, snappy build guides. See you next time.